Good evening, everybody. My name is Betsy Fischer Martin, and I am the Executive Director of the Women in Politics Institute at American University, and we're thrilled that you could join us this evening. For those of you new to some of our events, WPI is a nonprofit and nonpartisan institute and AU School of Public Affairs that aims to close the gender gap in political leadership, and we offer academic training, and we facilitate research, and we do discussions like this on women in politics. So thanks for being a part of the conversation tonight. We are delighted to have with us the one-time governor of South Carolina, and the former ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley. She has written a new book based on her experience in those two high-profile posts called With All Due Respect, Defending America with Grace and Grit. And we're so glad that she's here with us to share her stories. We're going to save plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question, please go to the Ask the Question button on the bottom of your screen, and we will get your questions in toward the end of the program as well. And there's also a green button at the bottom that you can use to purchase a copy of her book. So Ambassador Nikki Haley, welcome.
Thanks so much, Betsy, for doing this. And it's really fun to see all the messages scrolling on the screen. Thanks for everybody that's joining us.
Well, I want to start with the title of your book, With All Due Respect, Defending America with Grit and Grace. I love the grit and grace part at the end. And you write in your book, you said, women are cautious about politics for good reason. It's not a pretty business. It's often hateful. It would be wonderful if we could change our politics in America to make it less nasty and personal. But until that happens, especially if you're a woman, you have to stand up for yourself always. You don't have to be ugly about it. You should do it with grit and grace.
Well, and that's right. You know, I've always said that I kick with a smile. You know, there's a way that you can do things. And I learned that early on. You know, in my first job, right out of college, I was the accounting supervisor for a company and 6 of its subsidiaries. And I was green and excited to have my first new job, but it was an all-male executive team. And I remember we had one of our first meetings. It was in my first 2 weeks, and the CEO was running late. And when I got there, we're sitting down, we're waiting on him, and all of a sudden he comes in and he races in, he's out of breath, and the CFO turns to me at that time and says, Nikki, why don't you go get Paul a cup of coffee? And I remember then not knowing what I was going to do, but very well understanding that whatever I did would define how they treated me going forward. And so I looked at him and I said, absolutely. And I leaned to the phone in the center of the table and I called my assistant and I said, Kim, would you please get Paul a cup of coffee? And they just looked shocked. They never asked me to get a cup of coffee again. But I didn't have to embarrass them. I didn't have to call them out, but I made my point. And I've always tried to do that going forward. You know, there's, especially in politics, they can, you know, it's always not the nicest of places. The UN was not for the faint at heart. But there's a way to get your point across without screaming. There's a way to get your point across that's strong. And there's a way to do it respectfully. And I think you can kind of educate and communicate when you do that.
And even when you were negotiating with President Trump on taking the position, you were very clear on the type of position you wanted it to be, that it needed to be a cabinet level post. It hadn't always been, although it's gone back and forth a few times. And you were clear about the kind of staff you wanted to have. So you accepted the position, but you did so with conditions that would benefit you.
Well, you know, I had the best job in the world. I was governor of the state of South Carolina and proud to serve the state that raised me and didn't need to leave. You know, our daughter had just started college. Our son was 15. It didn't, you know, it wasn't an easy time to pick up and move to New York. So I wanted to make sure, I think it's really important that when you take on a challenge, make sure that the situation allows you for success. And so what I told the president was, look, if we're going to talk about this position, there needs to be some conditions. And one is, I've been a governor. I don't want to work for anyone else. I want to work directly with you. So it would need to be a cabinet position. And he said, done. And I said, well, I'm a policy girl. I want to be in the room when decisions are made. So I want to be on the National Security Council. He said, done. And I said, well, I'm not going to be a wallflower or a talking head. I want to be able to say exactly what I think. And he said, Nikki, that's exactly why I want you to do this. And, I always tell people, what if I wouldn't have asked for those things? What if I wouldn't have done that? I wouldn't have been as strong with my voice. I wouldn't have been able to accomplish the things that I was able to, and I wouldn't have had such a good direct relationship with him. And I think that's really important, that when you take on a challenge, don't be afraid to jump, but set the stage so that you can be successful when you jump.
And did you learn that over time? Had you always been someone that would have set the conditions out, or is that something over the course of your political career that you realized later and put into practice?
I think we're all a work in progress. I think
Yeah.
we all learn from experiences, and mine started in kindergarten. I was, we were the only Indian family in a small rural town. I always tell people we weren't white enough to be white. We weren't black enough to be black. My father wore a turban. He still does to this day. At that time, my mom wore a sari. People didn't know who we were, what we were, or why we were there. And when I would get teased and I would come home and complain about it, my mom would always say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson on the playground carried out to when I was a legislator, or when I was a governor or an ambassador, or even in the corporate world. Because I think that when you first talk about the things that you have in common, everybody lets their guard down. Then you can actually debate the issues that get you to a solution. And I think that I've learned those things over time. And I've also found out that for everyone that is in a room, you've earned the right to be in that room. So act like it. If there's something that needs to change, say it. If there's something you want to do, do it. But make sure when you walk out of that room that everybody that was in that room is better because you were there. Have something to contribute, have results to give, and show them why you're valuable. I think that's really important.
You also say in the book, you said, you can say almost anything with both strength and dignity if you start with all due respect and a well-timed bless your heart that will keep your enemies guessing. The story that you told about that was even back before, when President Trump was then candidate Trump, and you were supporting Marco Rubio for president. And you got into a little bit of a back and forth with Donald Trump over Twitter. No big surprise there. But he sort of called you and said the people of South Carolina are embarrassed by Nikki Haley. And then you fired off the tweet heard round the South that said, bless your heart.
I think the thing is, look, I knew Donald Trump prior to him running for president. He had supported me my first time when I was running for governor. We were acquaintances. We knew each other and had talked before. But, when he was running, there were 16 candidates, and there was so much talent on that stage. And at the time, I put my support behind Marco, and the president did what he does, is when he feels kicked, he hollers. But I did what he knows me to do, which is when you push, I push back. And for him to say the people of South Carolina are embarrassed by Nikki Haley, it was a lot I could say, but there was nothing better than just bless your heart. It said a lot without having to go too far. And at the end of the day, we respected each other. We knew that, how each other was. We knew that we were going to speak our minds. And I think that at the end of the day, once he won the primary, I was there for him. But, he knows I'm tough, and he knows that I'm going to speak the truth. And I appreciate that, that he respects that.
And the with all due respect title of your book, I think comes from a story that you relay during your time in the administration when you had a back and forth with Larry Kudlow, the Economic Council director. Tell us what happened there and how you handled that in a way that was diplomatic, but that you were going to make sure that people knew what the situation was.
It was a tough time with Russia, and we had been going back and forth on some things they were doing within Syria and chemical weapons. And the president had done quite a bit on Russia, but we had had 2 meetings in the National Security Council where the president had decided to push and put more sanctions on Russia. And this had been confirmed again, and I had talked to him on that Friday to confirm it. And I only did Sunday shows when the White House would ask me to. And so they had asked me to do 2 Sunday shows, and I did. And in one of those Sunday shows, I said, well, you're going to see that the United States is going to put forth sanctions on Russia if Secretary Mnuchin hasn't already. And went ahead and finished my show, didn't hear anything. And then that evening, Secretary Mnuchin, who's a great friend, called me and said, Nikki, I think there's a little bit of a problem. He said, you were absolutely right in everything that you said, but the president changed his mind. And I said, well, it's fine if the president changes his mind, just go out and tell everybody he's decided to delay the sanctions until a later date. Well, he said, well, the White House is going to put out a statement. Well, the next day they put out a statement and it didn't quite say that. It was a little bit more ambiguous. And so at that point, the press started calling, rightfully, because they wanted to know what the situation was. And I called a few people. I called John Bolton. I called Mike Pompeo. I called the chief of staff, Kelly, at the time. And I said, look, we need to set the record straight. In my opinion, the best thing to do is tell the truth. And people will appreciate that. They'll move on. The president is the president. He has every right to change his mind. There's nothing wrong with that. And we'll be better for it. Well, they all just kind of listened but didn't do anything. The press continued to call. It continued to escalate. Everybody said Nikki Haley wouldn't say this if there wasn't an issue to it. The next day, nothing happened and it had gotten worse. And I called them again and I said, look, you've got until 5 o'clock to fix this. Either you fix it or I fix it. And trust me, you don't want me to fix this. And they sat there, and I think that maybe their way of fixing it was to send Larry Kudlow out there at 4:45. And that at that time, first question they asked was about my statement. And Larry Kudlow at that point said, I think Ambassador Haley was momentarily confused. And
so right under the bus you were thrown.
I was looking at the TV and I knew that it was about to be 5 o'clock and my friend Dana Perino was going to be on the 5. And I texted her and I said, Dana, I need to go on the record. And she said, okay, what? And she had called me and I said, just one sentence. With all due respect, I don't get confused. And she said, that's it. And I said, that's it. I'll send it in a text so that you have it on the record. And she said it, and within 10 minutes, Larry Kudlow called and said, Nikki, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said it. And I said, Larry, at what point would you ever say someone is confused? I said, no, let me take that back. At what point would you ever say that I am confused? You're right. I've got my tail between my legs. I love you. And you know that. I'll make it right. And I said, you will. And I need you to make it right now. And he said, how? And I said, I need you to call the press and tell them that you were wrong. He said, I can't do that. And I said, you have to do that. And he said, okay. And to his credit, he immediately called the press. He told them that he was wrong and it fixed the situation. And really the moral of that story is no one is going to stand up for you but yourself. And all you have is your dignity and your respect. And if you don't fight for it, no one else will. And it was one of those things, I didn't want to have to do it. I did everything I could to keep that from happening. I did it in a way that I was the most respectful I thought I could do, but I wasn't going to get thrown under the bus. And you got to do that from time to time.
You also write in the book about your experience at the UN. And when you took that position, you did not have a ton of foreign policy experience, admittingly, but you felt, I think, when you got there, that maybe you were being underestimated. And that's a theme that you talk about a lot in the book, about critics and underestimating you. And you actually get some power from that, you say.
I've been underestimated all my life. When I defeated a 30-year incumbent in the legislature, in the corporate world, when I was in an all-male executive team as the first female governor, and the youngest governor in the country at the time, and then going to the UN, and I understood it. I didn't have a lot of foreign policy experience. I had a lot of domestic policy as a governor. It was a lot of studying and a lot of learning, but I purposely didn't study the do's and don'ts of the UN. I wanted to go in with fresh eyes. I wanted to go in and really kind of see it for myself and ask for forgiveness if I needed, but kind of do it on my own terms. And what was really important to me was I wanted to be honest, I wanted to be fair, and I wanted to make sure that other countries knew what the United States stance on every issue was. I didn't want there to be any gray. They didn't have to like us, but I wanted them to have clarity on where we were coming from. And there were some that said she's just a governor, she can't do this, or she doesn't have foreign policy experience. But the best way to prove yourself is to work. The best way to prove yourself is to show how hard you'll work and give results in the process. And that's how respect is earned. You don't have to scream, you don't have to fight, you don't have to tell people it's not true, you just prove it. And I think when you prove what you're made of, that's when respect follows.
As you reflect on your time at the UN, what were sort of the lessons that you came away with from that experience on the world stage?
That I think that whether it's the world stage, whether it's governor, whether it's in the corporate world, relationships matter. They really do matter. And with all of those countries, I built really strong relationships, whether it was the Russian ambassador or the Chinese ambassador or, any of the other ambassadors. You have to have a relationship in order to have a conversation. And then you have to be honest in order to get to a better place. And the best way to do that is to understand the fears of the other person you're talking to. It's like when we were negotiating North Korea. The best way for me to negotiate those sanctions against North Korea was to understand what China was scared of. And they were scared of two things. They were scared of, one, war on the peninsula. They didn't want that. And two, they didn't want, if Kim fell, they were worried all those North Koreans would go into China, and they didn't want that. And so in my negotiations, I always came from those two perspectives. Of, we don't want war, so if we don't want war, we need to do these sanctions. Or you need to understand we're not looking for regime change. We want to make sure that we're just making sure that we stop the nuclear program. And so there's ways you can do that. And so I think I learned that. I also learned that you can't buy friends. And I think past administrations, Republicans and Democrats, have made the mistake of thinking if you give aid to countries, that they will like you, that they will vote for you. And that's just not the case, and what I saw, especially during the time when we were moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and we were basically condemned by the entire world for doing that. What I noticed was, they would sit there and badmouth us and they would disrespect us, but in the second breath, they would have their hand out wanting aid. And one of the things I did, I remember, just to kind of try and prove a point to the president, our staff got together and we developed a book. And in that book, we listed every country. And we listed all of the money that we would send to that country. And we listed the voting preferences on how often they would vote with the United States and how often they wouldn't. And what we noticed, was obviously that there were a lot that weren't voting for us that we were actually helping. And I took it to the president. He literally lost his mind. But it was like countries like Pakistan. We were giving them $1 billion in aid, and all they were doing were harboring terrorists trying to kill our soldiers. We don't give that $1 billion to Pakistan anymore. And those are the lessons we need to learn, is we have to have relationships that are win-win, not those that are adversarial.
You also talk in the book about the importance of talking to women when you traveled, and what you could learn from those experiences, especially women in some of the refugee camps. Tell us about your experience speaking to some of them.
I'm a big fan of women. I think that they are incredibly intuitive. I think they're smart. They know how to balance. They know how to prioritize. And whatever they put their mind to, they're great at. And so when I would go to these refugee camps, whether it was the Syrian refugees in Jordan and Turkey, or whether it was refugees in South Sudan or the Democratic Republic of Congo, they were under such stress and they had been through so much fighting and destruction that what I noticed in my first trip, I asked for the men to leave the room because I was meeting with the refugees, and I asked for the men to leave the room, and it was just me and a female aide. And when I did that, I was able to ask those women questions, and they could tell me how the situation happened and what needed to happen to fix it. They could tell me what their families were going through and how they wanted to make things better. And it was just very insightful. It was very honest, and it was very helpful. And in many cases, you saw the women in these refugee camps, They started their own businesses. They were sewing and they were baking and they were doing coffee shops and they became great business owners. But they also told me what was wrong with the situation. And I just started everywhere I went would meet with the women because I felt like I got more honest answers with women than I did with the men.
I want to also ask you about, there's been a lot of discussion about women leading through a crisis. And you talk a lot in your book about an experience that you say forever changed you, that it was the hardest point in your life professionally, and going through the horrible shooting at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, and how you got through that and how you led the state through that. Can you share a little bit about that experience and how you were able to kind of lead through that crisis?
It was just so painful, Betsy. I mean, there's just no way to describe the fact that this happened in a church, you know, a place where you're supposed to feel safe, a place where kids feel safe, a place where you could be as vulnerable as possible. And, you know, you had this guy that came into a Bible study with 12 people. And on that night, I always say he didn't look like them. He didn't act like them. He didn't sound like them. And they didn't throw him out and they didn't call the cops. Instead, they pulled up a chair and prayed with him for an hour. And when they bowed their heads in that last prayer, he began to shoot. And these were people like Ethel Lance, who had lost her daughter to breast cancer and had a broken heart. But she would go around Mother Emanuel, cleaning that church, singing, "One day at a time, sweet Jesus, that's all I ask of you. Give me the strength to do every day what I have to do." It was people like Tawanza Sanders, who was our youngest victim. And on that night, he stood in front of his 87-year-old great Aunt Susie and looked at the killer and said, "You don't have to do this. We mean no harm to you." Or it was people like Cynthia Hurd, whose life motto was just to be kinder than necessary. It was painful to think about what they went through. I knew too many details of what happened in the room. And I went to every single funeral. And they were all open caskets. And you saw the families crying over their loved ones. You saw the pastor with tears down his eyes, and it was real pain. And I think that the best way to understand how to lead is to understand another person's pain. But I'm so proud of the people of South Carolina, because we didn't have violence. We had vigils. We didn't have protests. We had hugs. And at the end of the day, we removed a divisive symbol that caused a lot of people pain. And I think it showed the world what grace and strength look like through the eyes of the people of South Carolina.
You also, after that experience, were able to kind of bring the state and lead the effort together to remove the Confederate flag from the State House grounds. And again, another issue that is in the news now with the discussion about Confederate monuments, and then of course Mississippi changing their flag. How were you able to bring people together? And I also saw something that you wrote recently where you don't think that that would have been able to happen at this time. Why is that?
Well, we did it because it was, a flag is a living, breathing symbol. It represents the present. It represents the situation as it is today. And I've often said that flag never should have been on the State House in the first place. It was put on there kind of to defy how the country had changed. It had done, for all the wrong reasons. But when it was time to pull down the flag, I have often said and been criticized for the fact that I gave the differing viewpoints of what happened. And in 2015, I've said the same thing in 2020 that I've said in 2015, but in 2020, I get criticized for it. You had a group of people that when they saw the flag, they felt real pain. They felt the pain of slavery. They felt the pain of being held down. But you had another group of people who, when they saw the Confederate flag, they felt service and sacrifice and heritage. My job as governor was not to judge either side of those. that my job was not to call one side or the other wrong. My job was, how do I take both groups to a further place that is better for the people of South Carolina? And moving the flag. So when I called for the flag, I asked the people of South Carolina to join me. I asked for them to respectfully put it in a museum where it belonged, because it didn't represent the people of South Carolina anymore. It was a tough debate, but the people of South Carolina made the right decision. The flag came down, and the idea of monuments did come up at the time, and people wanted to bring down other monuments. And I said, look, if we start doing that to South Carolina, you're going to take down every street sign, every building name, every monument. Instead, when you look at those statues, see them as history, see them as lessons in life. And what we should do is, rather than take down statues, let's add to it. Supported Mayor Riley's effort to bring an African-American museum to Charleston. We supported a Mother Emanuel monument. We added to history that showed that South Carolina was changing for the better. And I think we have to be really careful, because now if you express anything like that, people are ready to tear you down. And I was very honest with the people of South Carolina then. I've been honest about the situation now, and people find fault with what I'm saying now. And that's why I said I worry that if we had gone through that situation today, it's so toxic. Would people have listened to each other? Would they have been willing to understand the pain of each other? And would they have wanted to move forward to make, the state stronger? And I hope that that would be the case, but I worry that it's not.
We have a lot of questions from the audience, so I want to go through a few of those with you. And I want to start, let's see, there's a question that a lot of people are interested in about the Twitter accounts. I don't know if you saw this reference earlier, just actually a little while ago, that Vice President Joe Biden and Obama's and some other important figures their Twitter accounts were hacked today. And the question is, given that figures like President Trump use Twitter so frequently for policy announcements and more, how dangerous is this? And do you think our leaders should place less importance on social media? That's a question from Austin.
Importance on social media. I mean, it's out there. I think it allows for freedom of speech, like it or not. We have haters on there. We have fans on there. I have been hacked through Instagram, Twitter, multiple ways. I think more what we want to do is look at the foreign actors who are hacking, because I think that China, Iran, North Korea, they're all doing that. And I think that we have to continue to watch that. So I think from that aspect, it's not bringing down freedom of speech. We don't ever want to do that. We just want to make sure that we're on to the bad actors that do that. I mean, look, there are things on social media that are hateful. And there are things on social media that we don't disagree with. But I don't think shutting down people's views is the answer. I think making sure that we keep wrongdoings, from hackings to, death threats to things like that, I think we always should keep those at bay. But I don't think we want to stop people from expressing their views.
Great. Let's see, another question here. This is from Holly. She says, can you discuss how we should deal with China in a post-COVID world? How do we hold a strong front without compromising anything in the process? And how do we hold them accountable?
Stop being naive to China. I think that it's, for too long, many people and administrations and congressional groups and everyone thought that if we were nice to China, that they would somehow start acting like us. They don't want to be like us. They want to be communists. That's who they are. That's what they're doing. They're consistent in doing that, and they've been doing that for a long time. I think what we have to do is wake up and realize that China is on a strategy and on a mission, and they've been on that for years, and we have to wake up to that and be smart to that. They are expanding their military, and that's a national security threat to us. They are one of the worst human rights abusers by putting 1 million Uyghurs or Muslims in concentration camps, by the way they're doing a surveillance state now in Hong Kong and arresting protesters just for speaking their mind. They're starting to be bullish in the South China Sea, where 1/3 of shipping happens. They're trying to now move in on Taiwan, which is a real concern. And I think what we have to make sure that we do is understand that also on top of that, they're investing in other countries. And when they invest in these countries, what they're doing is they're putting in infrastructure, running up the debt, And when those countries can't pay it back, they're going to say, I want that utility. I want that military installation. And when they do that, if you look at the map of where they invested, it'll send a chill up your spine. But one of the worst things that I always talk about is President Xi started a commission that he chairs. And it basically says any company that does business in China has to cooperate with the Chinese military. Think about that. Think about your data. Think about the companies that are in China. Think about what that means for you and your family. Another aspect of, look at the during COVID. In January, when we were all just starting to find out about the virus, American companies, 3M and Honeywell, who produce all these PPE and these masks, China forbid them from exporting any of that to any other country. They bought it from them wholesale, and then they would only give it to the countries that agreed to work with Huawei, their 5G network. That's who we're dealing with. That's the China that we know of. And while the entire world stood still at one moment in time, and every leader of every country was trying to work on saving lives, China was using their bully efforts in the South China Sea. They were arresting protesters in Hong Kong while no one was looking. They were continuing to hide about COVID and not share what they knew or how they knew it. I mean, this is what we're talking about. They were continuing to abuse Uyghurs and bring more of them in to do forced labor. I mean, these are terrible things. That's who China is. That's who they want to be. And they won't be satisfied until they become dominant. So the best thing the United States can do is continue to strengthen our military, work with our allies. Right now, Japan, Australia, I mean, you have these countries, India, all of them would love to step away from China and would love to come towards the United States. Japan just spent $1 billion in an effort to disassociate from China. We need to also work with the others. Australia has been threatened and are going through cyber attacks that have happened because of China. We need to make sure that we pull our allies together. It's a great opportunity for us to really kind of set China straight, but we need to be smart and we need to let them know we're on to them.
Another foreign policy question from Zila. She says, what do you think about Russia paying bounties to the Taliban for targeting U.S. forces? And how about the peace process in Afghanistan?
So two things. I think, first of all, the Russian bounties, all I can do is tell you from my experience. When I was UN ambassador, I would go through my briefings every day of all of the things that were happening that were threats to America's national security. It was, when you get that intelligence, the goal of the intelligence is to use it for our country to be smarter, to be safer, and to make better decisions. What is common is a lot of different intel will go into the intelligence community. In this case, from what they're saying is you had one sign of the fact that those bounties were being paid and you didn't have any other corroboration. So they didn't know if it was accurate. What I saw is sometimes you would get some of that security information and it would show the dissenting views, those that disagreed with what the intel asset had to say. My guess is that didn't get to the president because there wasn't enough corroboration with it. So first thing we need to do, and I'm sure that they're working on this, is find out what the truth is to it. Because if there are any bounties paid, we need to do something about it. The reason why I don't think that was put in front of the president is because anytime we had any sort of security information that implied our troops were in danger, the president reacted so fast. That was one of the things he was most aggressive on. And one of the things that he worked the hardest on was making sure that none of our soldiers were at risk. It's why he talks a lot about getting them out of those areas. So I hope that the intel communities are looking into that. You can't trust Russia ever, ever. They are not our friend. They will never be our friend, and we can't put it past them. And I think we need to investigate that. When it comes to Afghanistan and looking at a peace plan, I mean, again, it's hard to trust the Taliban. And I think you've got the fact that Iran is using their influence in there. You also see Russia starting to get involved in Afghanistan, and it's becoming a more dangerous place. And what we have to be very careful of is what is our goal. And I think the best thing we can do is we should have intelligence on the ground so that we know exactly what's happening in the Afghanistan situation and make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep America safe and keep our allies safe. And so the intelligence community is going to be more important now than ever in Afghanistan. And we have to wait and see what happens. It's tough. My husband was deployed to Afghanistan. He served a year in Helmand Province. It's a very, very dangerous place for our soldiers. And the idea that Iran is getting more infiltrated in those peace talks and getting involved with the Taliban, and the fact that Russia is joining forces in there too, we should all be concerned.
We have a couple questions about your advice to young women who want to run for office, and if you could just give your perspective on that, what skills they should be focusing on, their professional development, and also talk about in a reference in your book where you talk about the word ambition and your thoughts on how people see you and what that means to you.
Well, first of all, I will say to any ladies that are listening to this, whether you are Republican or Democrat, we need your voice. We are 51% of the voting population. Like I told you, I'm a fan of women. I think we're amazing at what we do. But what we do is we second guess ourselves. It is just a human nature that we have. When we think about doing something, we wait for others to validate. You don't need any validation. You need your gut. If you feel like you can make a difference, jump. One of the best lessons I can tell you is to learn to push through the fear. When we're presented with a challenge, the natural instinct is to step back. When you push through that fear and you take on that challenge, you find out you're so much stronger on the other side. If I wouldn't have pushed through the fear, I never would have run for office and defeated a 30-year incumbent. If I wouldn't have pushed through the fear, I never would have become governor. If I wouldn't have pushed through the fear, I certainly wouldn't have become ambassador. And if you push through the fear, you can make a difference to those around you. If you don't push through the fear, you're missing out on life. And, and all of us are not benefiting from it. So if you're thinking about it, I'll tell you what I was told when I had to run for the State House the first time. I was told that I was an outsider. I was told that I didn't have enough experience. I was told that my children were too young. I was told that I needed to wait and start at the school board level, not at the State House level. And for all of those reasons, that's exactly why I needed to do it. I needed to show that we could do that. And I think that that's why we need your voices. We need real people to run, not people who have practiced their whole life to do this. We need real people to run. And I think that women have an amazing way of understanding the pain and challenges of others, but also understanding what it takes to get to a solution. Now, once you are in a position, whether it's in the corporate world, in politics, in any industry, when you work and you are good at what you do, it is often that women are called ambitious. Now, if a man is called ambitious, he's a rising star and he's doing great things. If a woman is called ambitious, she's considered calculating, she's considered strategic, she's considered, it's not given the same connotation. And, what I've told people is, I do what my mom and my dad always taught me. They always said, whatever you do, be great at it and make sure people remember you for it. Well, in every one of my jobs, I have been called ambitious. I have been called by men who were threatened to be overly ambitious and overly strategic. They can call me whatever they want. I'll just, as I said in the book, I'll just refer to myself as a badass. I think that whatever I've done, I've tried to make a difference. I've tried to make people proud, and I've tried to do the best that allows me to sleep at night. And I hope that all of you will take that motivation and go use the power of your voice. We need you, and the world and the country will be better for having you.
And where, as you sit here now in 2020, what are your thoughts for your own future post the UN? I know there's always a lot of discussion about, is Nikki Haley going to run for president potentially? Not that you're going to announce right here tonight, but what are your thoughts on another chapter in public service in one way or another?
I think it's so funny because so many people, aside from calling me ambitious, they call me calculating, they call me strategic. And the truth is, the reason I left the UN is because I'm a mom. and I'm a daughter. And our son was going to be a senior in high school, and I wanted to be there as he was going to his campus visits. I wanted to be all in for him as he was deciding what his second home was going to be. And my parents are both in their 80s. My mom has Parkinson's, and we've taken care of them for several years. I needed to make sure that they were okay. And I've always said if I'm a good mom and a good wife, I'll be a good governor, I'll be a good ambassador, but I need to be a good mom and a good wife and a good daughter. And it was time for me to step down just for the sake of my family. Having said that, I know I'm too young to stop fighting. I want to keep moving the ball. I don't know what that looks like. And I'm not being calculating or strategic. What I believe is that I use common sense. A year is a lifetime in politics. And there's no way I would start to presume or think about something, in the future. I take it a year at a time, and that's enough for me. It's always been enough for me, was to take it a year at a time, make today better than yesterday, and that's what I'll do. And for all those people that want to talk about me being president, it's easier to tell someone else to do it. I mean, it's pretty out there. It's not fun. It's not for the faint at heart, and it's tough to be in politics right now. So, it's something that I'm going to continue to take it a year at a time and do it at my pace, not at anybody else's pace.
I'm curious about your reflections on the campaign this time, and not in your party, of course, but we did have several women running for president in the Democratic Party. Just an observer of politics, what were your thoughts on how they were perceived, this whole notion of electability, that discussion that was going on? What are your thoughts as you reflect on that primary campaign in the Democratic Party?
I think that we had some strong women that ran for office, and I respect any man or woman that puts their hat in the ring. I really respect all the women that put their hat in the ring. I often say that the reason I got into politics, believe it or not, I don't agree with anything that she has to say, but was because of Hillary Clinton. I was at a Furman Institute event for women, and she was the one that said, for all the reasons people tell you shouldn't run, those are the reasons you should. And I walked out of there and decided to run for the State House. And I hope that, we can encourage women to get involved. We can encourage them to be a part of the process. And so when I saw those women running, I was happy. You don't want to see a bunch of men running everything when we have 51% of the population. I think they did the best they could. I think just like any man, you have to have the right messaging. You have to have the right communication. You have to connect with people and be able to feel what their concerns are and think about what you're going to do about it. And so I think there will continue to be women that run for office in all levels. And I think that we will see women win. And I'm tired of them talking about when will we have a woman president? When will we have this or that? I think we want the right president. And if it happens to be a woman, great. But if it's not, we want the right person. And that will happen. One of the things that I loved about being the first woman governor of South Carolina was that people would quit talking about it. Because once you do it, then they no longer talk about it. And I look forward to the day that nobody's talking about that anymore.
So we also have a question about the Republican Party from Caitlin. And she says, what do you foresee as the future of the Republican Party? Is there a policy direction you think the party should move to? And how do you think the Republican Party can garner and attract more women candidates?
Well, I think that the Republican Party can continue to improve. I mean, it certainly has to continue to improve. And the best way is to change with the times. And that doesn't mean you change with rhetoric. That means you change with challenges. And so I think that one of the things I'd like to see the Republican Party do is to inspire and relate more to women, inspire and relate more to minorities, because I think you have a lot of people out there that would resonate with the Republican Party. They would resonate with the fact that we have too much debt and we have to rein this in for the good of our children and our grandchildren, that we want small business owners to be able to thrive like my parents who worked so hard to build a business from the ground up, and 30 years later it was a multi-million-dollar business. We want to make sure that the military, like my husband, that they're safe and that they have the tools that they need to be effective. We want our children to get a good education, but we want that education to apply to today's world's jobs, not 20 years ago. So I think that what's important for the Republican Party, women care about the fact that the party needs to be changing with the times. But what we don't need to do is to say to women or minorities, or anyone for that matter, you should be with us. No, you have to go to them. You have to listen to them. You have to hear what they care about, and you have to talk to them about it. One, you will learn a lot in the process, but two, it will expand the party to let them understand we do have solutions to the challenges that they care about. We do have things that can relate to that. And so I hope that we have a Republican Party that continues to grow, not just in demographics, continues to grow in representation, but continues to grow in solutions. What are we going to do to deal with, the new issues of government and the fact that we have so much debt? But what are we going to do to really make sure that we spur the economy, that we spur small business, that we take on the challenges of rural communities that don't have internet, that don't have broadband, that don't have education systems that we need for them to be strong. I grew up in a rural community in South Carolina, 2,500 people and 2 stoplights. We didn't have all of the resources that the wealthy communities had, but those kids deserve just as much as those kids in the wealthy communities. We've got to work to figure out how do we improve those situations so that everybody is lifted up. Because when you lift up everyone, when you can show everyone hope, that's when magic happens. That's when you can really start to see improvement. And I hope that the Republican Party continues to work on those solutions and continues to work on growing that umbrella. It's good for the country if we do that.
We also have a question from Holly, who asks, I saw your article recently about cancel culture in America. Do you think you can talk a little bit about more about this and how you think we can help our nation move away from it?
Yeah, this is really important because the cancel culture that's happening now, I love freedom of speech. I love people using the power of their voice. I've been, preaching that ever since I can remember. And so I love that. What I'm worried about now is you have the vast majority of people who are looking for solutions. If you look at the situation of George Floyd, the majority of the country was shocked and appalled by it. They were disgusted by what happened. And they wanted a solution. They wanted accountability. But now suddenly it's gone from working towards a solution to hate. So you've got 1% of the loud voices canceling people that disagree with them, but you 99% of the population that wants to get to a solution. So what needs to happen is you have to do like what we did with Walter Scott. We had a shooting. Walter Scott was shot multiple times in the back. He was unarmed by a dirty cop. And it played all over the country. Everybody saw that video. And what's worse is Walter Scott's family had to watch him die over and over again. We didn't go in and allow all of this lawlessness to happen. We got to the table. We brought in Walter Scott's family. We brought in law enforcement because there's no one that wants to get rid of dirty cops more than good cops. We sat them at the table, and South Carolina passed the first body camera bill in the country. And we did it in the name of that was going to hold accountable for anyone that was victimized in a wrongful way, but it was also going to help defend good cops that were trying to do the right thing. That's what should have happened. When you start vandalizing structures and buildings and you stop using the rule of law, cancel culture is not what's moving us forward. That's not taking us to a solution. Bringing down the statues of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln and Gandhi and Ulysses S. Grant, don't do that to your children. Don't do that to anyone. And by doing that, where are we going? You can't tell me that bringing those statues down, what does that do for George Floyd's family? It doesn't do anything. The answers come in talking to each other. The answers come in getting to solutions. The answers come in every city and state in the country saying, how do we hold our cops accountable? How do we make sure good cops report bad cops? And I'll tell you as a governor, because when we were looking at multiple law enforcement issues over my 6 years, one of the worst things that happens is when they have a cop that does something wrong, when they have a bad cop, they move it. Don't move him, get rid of him. Don't move him to go do that in another community. That's one of the things you do. And you need more transparency on those that have had charges brought against them. That's how you fix these things. But I promise you, bringing down any of these statues, vandalizing any buildings, that's not going to help save the next George Floyd of the world. And so cancel culture to me is going back, and that article was reminding people that our society was based on the values of mutual respect and on freedom of speech. Cancel culture rejects both of those. All they're trying to do is to make everyone conform to how they think and to bring people down. That's not America. That's not who we are. And we can't let that be what takes us forward.
You write in the book about President Trump during the campaign, especially, and how you thought some of his rhetoric was over the top in terms of dealing with immigration. I'm curious now, and do you think that some of the rhetoric that is coming out of the White House is fueling some of these problems, or is he able to have a national conversation on these issues that you're talking about, or is it just too difficult for that to happen?
No, I mean, I think that there is, and I talk about this in the book, there is responsibility by every single person on how we go forward, whether it's the president, to the media, to governors, to everyone. We all have a responsibility on our tone, what we say, and how we say it, and whether it moves the ball for the better. And, there are times, and I give a couple of examples, multiple examples in the book, where I, sat down with the president or called him and said, why did you do that? Or I don't think that was helpful, or that was irresponsible. And, what I appreciate is that he would say, well, why do you think that? And we would have a conversation, and he would actually talk about how the way forward. And that's what you do. Is I always felt like, people say, how did you get along with the president? I told him the truth. I did for him what I wanted my cabinet to do for me as governor, which was serve the people well, be creative, and if you see me doing something wrong, say it. And I did that for him, and he was very respectful and always appreciated that. And I think that we have to all hold each other accountable. When we see rhetoric that is hurtful, when we see something that is not moving the ball forward, we should say it. But the way we say it matters. I didn't say it and blow it up in front of everybody and go on the screen, in that executive room in my first job, any more than I did with the president. But I said it in a way that was respectful and got my point across. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to remember there is more that brings us together than divides us. And there's a way to go forward if we handle it that way.
Do you think that there are people now in the White House and his inner circle that are as frank as you and are willing to intervene when they need to and talk to him, or not?
No, I mean, I think in any administration, I think that, he had those that were not as honest with him, and then he had those of us that were brutally honest with him. I will tell you, the ones he respected at the end of the day were the ones that were brutally honest with him.
Time for a few more questions here, quick ones. Peyton asked, what was the transition between running a state to representing the interests of the nation at large on the international stage like for you? Oops. Hold on, I think we lost you. Just a second. I'll get you back. Sorry.
So there was a massive learning curve. On one side, what you saw was, I knew how to manage, I knew how to lead a state, I knew how to deal with policies. But on the other side, when you go to foreign policy, you're dealing with a whole lot of other things. So it was a massive learning curve, a lot of studying, learning who our friends were, who our foes were, and how we were going to go forward. I think what I found actually were the things that were similar. And it was that as governor, you had to be a problem solver. And at the UN, I felt the same way. I had to be a problem solver. You had to be strategic as governor to figure out how to get you to the the solution, and the same with ambassador. And then in negotiating as governor, I always had to understand and listen to what my opponent was saying, understand their fears, and then propose something that would take us across the finish line. And that was the same in foreign policy. You had to understand who they were, what their culture was, how they think, what they're scared of, and then go and try and do that. And through all of it, you tell the truth. Life is easier when you tell the truth. And when you do that, you find it works. But, the same strategies on both, just different policies. And I loved both. I loved both jobs the same. I mean, to serve the state that raised me and to represent the country I love so much, I've been a pretty lucky girl.
And here's a good question to end on. Your honesty and tenacity inspire so many of us. Who or what inspires you and motivates you?
I think what motivates me is just to feel like my life has meaning. I think I felt that really young when I was in high school and even in college. As I learned more about myself, I saw what my flaws were, I saw what my strengths were, and I was honest with myself to see what they were. But what I always knew was that I wanted to give back. My parents always said that we were blessed to live in this country, and the best way to appreciate it is to give back. I wanted to give back in a way that was real, not with words, but with actions. And I think that one of the motivating factors is not just how do I make the life of my children or soon, eventually grandchildren better. How do you make the country better? What's your contribution to the country? What's your contribution to the world? And, I think that I look at the tenacity of my mom, who was a lawyer and one of the first females named to the bench, but because she was in India and because it was too hard for women, she was never able to sit on that bench. And she was able to watch me become the first female governor in South Carolina. And I look at that, and it's why I think I push so hard through challenges. It's why I think I push through the fear for myself, because I think when you do that, you really find out you have so much to contribute and so much to give. And so what motivates me is just making sure that everybody that I'm in contact with, they're better because of something that I did to help. And that's what I'll always try and do, whether it's with my voice or with my actions or with encouraging other women to do things. I'll always try and move the ball. That's what I think we should all be doing.
Great. Well, Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the audience. I want to let everybody know that in 2 weeks, we will have Jennifer Palmieri here to talk about her new book. She's also an AU alum, but she, of course, was the communications director for President Obama and for Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. And then the Wednesday after that, on August 5th, we are going to have Congresswoman Jayapal, who has written a new book, Use the Power You Have, A Brown Woman's Guide to Politics and Political Change. And so she will be here on August 5th. So we invite you to join us for that. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a great week.
Thanks so much. God bless.